All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Corning Museum of Glass. We are live streaming now, so everybody that's joining us online, thanks for tuning in. Today we have two glass workers working with us from the Iittala factory in Finland, and we're going to be making some birds with them today. These are some really famous designs. But let me talk a little bit just about our gaffers, our glass workers up here today. So we have right here, this is Juha, and we also have Helena working with us. They come to us from Finland. We have another glass artist who lives here in Corning, but he's also Finnish. His name's Jussi, and he's going to be helping out. My name is Dane. I'll just talk you all through the process. So we're going to be making some birds that were designed by a really famous artist, a designer named Oiva Toikka. And he's been designing since, again, probably the early 70s. Really interesting, I just found out today that for Iittala, he's designed over 450 different birds. So we've been working all day here, and it's been really interesting just watching these two work because they're so efficient at what they do. They've just been going through the process, and it seems like every single piece that they make, it's different from the last. In fact, that's something that they pride themselves on, is making one-of-a-kind works of art. Well, if you're just viewing glass for the first time, I can tell you a little bit about glass in general and what we're doing up here. Now, we have right in the center of our stage a furnace full of glass. It's got about 1,000 pounds inside there. And our furnace is at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I talk about temperatures throughout the rest of this demonstration, I will be talking in terms of Fahrenheit. But we only melt clear glass inside there. We are going to be using color today. We'll talk about that in just a second. We are using the world's most common type of glass. It's called soda lime glass. It's really only got three main ingredients to it anyhow, which is silica sand, limestone, and soda ash. Silica is probably the base for the glass. You know, silica, our formula has about 70% silica. It's just like flour for baking. The things that you add to it really change the composition and the working properties of the glass. So a little bit of soda ash is added as a flux, just to keep the glass soft, workable for a long time. It also lowers the melting temperature. Limestone is added just as a stabilizer for the glass. Now, Juha has collected a little material from our furnace, and when we gather glass from our furnace, we're typically working off from stainless steel rods. This one happens to be hollow, so he's able to blow through the end of it to start a bubble inside the glass. Now, this is all clear glass right here. We are going to be adding color throughout this process. And when you want to make glass color, you do so by adding heavy metal oxides. This is all done in the melting process, and we're just adding a little bit of crushed up shards of glass on the surface of the clear. You simply do this by rolling through it. It sticks right to the surface of the clear glass. You have to do it while the glass is very hot, and it's typically right after we collect more material from our furnace. We are going to collect some more glass in just a second. Juha wants to let this bubble cool down. He wants it to solidify. Essentially, we're letting the glass solidify so we have a little bit more of a foundation to support this next collection of material. We've got a really great animation that we can play up on our screens as well. This animation, I think, describes the collecting or gathering process really well. But if you look, glass sits inside our furnace, inside like a big flower pot that we call a crucible. Glass at 2,100 degrees, it has a consistency just like room temperature table honey. So Juha dips that bubble below the level of the glass in our furnace. Even revolutions allow him to collect about 3 times the amount he started with. Quickly, he sits down at the bench. He uses a tool called a block just to get the glass under control. This tool is made out of wood. It might sound like a bad idea to shape glass that's 2,000 degrees with a piece of wood. It works very well though, mainly because we keep these tools soaked in water all the time. When the heat of the glass comes in contact with that water, it creates a thin little pocket of steam that the glass is riding on top of. And as long as we continue to re-wet those tools, those wooden tools will last us for quite some time. So it looks like we're rolling in some color over here, and this looks like the really dark red. The colors that we use, they're never going to show their true self until the glass is cooled down. And everything that's made out of glass has to cool down slowly. So you won't see the true color until tomorrow. All right, so we are going to be using a mold for this piece. Before you can go into the mold, you have to do a few things. You really need to make sure that you've got the right temperature, the right shape, and also the right thickness of glass throughout the bubble. And it can be varied in thickness depending on the part of the bubble. Blowing through the iron allows him to inflate that bubble. A lot of people think glass blowers have to have very strong lungs, but you know, when the glass is this hot, it's easier than blowing up a balloon, so it only takes a few pounds of pressure to do so. This pad right here, it's one of my favorite tools. This pad is made up of our local newspaper. It's just about 10 or 12 sheets of newspaper. We fold it into a square, and then we keep it wet all the time. And it's because of that water on the pad that keeps our hand from, of course, feeling that heat. But it also keeps the glass surface pristine. You know, if we don't wet that pad again and again, the paper begins to stick to the glass. So you'll see us re-wetting that tool quite frequently. Now, using a set of tools, they're called jacks, and these ones happen to be made of graphite. Juha is separating the bubble. Now, the shape for this bird is going to almost have a pedestal to it. So the bird will have a long leg with a stable or sturdy base that it's going to sit on. On the far side of our stage, we have a bench set up with some tools. And one of the main tools that we're using for most of the pieces that have been made today is this torch. Now, this torch is actuated by a foot pedal, so it allows for hands-free use. Before going into this mold, we do need to make sure we have enough heat throughout the bubble, just so that we can inflate the glass and it's going to inflate to fill the mold. Now, anytime we're heating inside a furnace like this, our reheating chamber, right at the face of the door, the glass closest to that door, it's always going to be a little colder because the heat is trying to escape from the door. So by using the torch, it allows us to kind of counteract that, just to get the heat relatively even throughout. So Helena has a mold set up right on the floor here, and this is a process that really does take two people. So Juha drips the glass into that mold at just the right temperature. Helena closes the mold. Now you'll see that once Juha has inflated the glass to be exactly the volume, the exact shape, he'll just tap his foot a little bit. There we go. Tapping the foot, it lets whoever know that it's time to open that mold. And really, he can't do it by telling Helena just because he's currently blowing into the iron. So that's a pretty universal thing. I've done that many times in factory setting as well. So we come out of the mold, and that's not the final shape, but it does give us an approximate shape for what we're making today. Quickly, using that wet newspaper, Juha is able to start to flatten the sides of the bird here. Helena, this is the kikuri bird. I believe that's what we talked about just before. All right, I just got confirmation. If you take a look up to our monitors, you'll see we've got a great visual. And in the upper right corner, you can see that we have one of these in our collection. And this was designed by Oiva Toikka in 1974, pretty early on in his career. If you're here with us today, you can go and view that. It's on display in our 35 Centuries of Glass gallery. It's been a really fun day of just learning, not only learning about glass, because watching these two work has been a real pleasure for me, just seeing a different way to work glass. And these are not things that I typically make in my own work, so to see the process, it is very interesting to me. But there's birds I never knew existed, so I've learned a lot about birds that they're making today. Whenever you're shaping the glass with any tool, you have to use a lot of finesse. If Juha was to take that pad and touch just a little bit too hard, it could really create a flat spot. And he's trying not to do that. So you might see that he kind of curves his hand as he's touching the glass. And it's such a light touch. We try to coerce the glass into the shape that we want, but you just can't do it too quickly. You can't move the glass faster than it wants to be moved. Doing so, you're just going to ruin that shape that you're working to create. So we'll switch over to the other side of our stage to finish this bird. Right now, Juha is kind of preheating a specific area. And this area is where we're going to add the head of the bird. So we preheat the glass. Helena will bring over a gather of material. They're going to drip it right onto that preheated area. Juha will cut free the amount that he'd like to work with. Now, anytime you cut glass, it leaves a pretty sharp little edge there. But just by using a torch, he's able to soften or flame polish that area. Because that glass is very hot, we've already preheated the sidewalls of the body of the bird. As he blows into the iron, that bubble begins to protrude into the hot glass. So Yusi, are you creating the beak right now? These will be the tail feathers. Okay. So this is one that we have not seen done yet today. So I've said this earlier, and if you're just joining us online, we will be here working with Juha and Helena for the next 2 days. So Saturday and Friday as well, tomorrow. We're going to be here working, making glass. So the first part of the tail feather is being added right now. It's been very interesting just watching how everything's set up here. In a factory setting, if you're making the same thing over and over again, you typically tweak your equipment, you have things placed in different areas, opposed to a traditional hot shop, just to make the process a little bit easier, a little bit faster for you. So this morning, before we started making glass, I bet you we spent about maybe a good half hour to an hour just getting the placement of all of the equipment exactly where we need it before starting to work production for the day. And eventually, or ultimately, it really just makes the process faster if you have everything exactly where it needs to be before you start. With that being said, working in a brand new studio, it's like, cooking in somebody else's kitchen that you've never used before. It just takes a little bit of time to get used to. Now, this is not Juha and Helena's first time here. This is the second year in a row that we've had them as guest artists. And after it being such a huge success last year, we asked them to come back again, and hopefully we'll continue this tradition. All right, this here is the Beak. Juha adds it on. As he's pulling the glass up, this helps to thin the glass. He cuts free the amount that he'd like to work with. You see that we keep going back to this reheating chamber, and this is really just to keep the glass warm. Now, if glass cools too quickly, it's a good chance that the glass will break apart from something we call thermal shock. What's happening is when the glass cools, it's shrinking a very small amount. And if it cools too fast, the surface begins to contract or shrink at a much faster rate than the core. So the glass will break right apart because of that. So everything that we make up here has to be slowly cooled. We call the process annealing, and something this thick, it'll probably only take about maybe 10 or 12 hours. The cooling rate is really driven by thickness, so if it's much thicker, it does take longer. But we're just about ready to break this piece free. Using a diamond file, Juha scores the glass. A little tap on the iron will break this piece free. Now, the bottom, it's going to be sharp and it's not flat. So we'll spend a minute. Oh, that happens from time to time. The glass may have just gotten a little bit too cold. Not to worry, though. We're just going to continue on. We've been working all day. That's the first time I've seen it happen. So that's all right. That's just the way it goes sometimes. So we're going to keep on moving to our next piece. All right, great. So I was just informed we have about 100 viewers online with us today, and they could be from anywhere in the world. So if any of you are kind of getting bitten by the glass bug and you'd like to continue to watch glass, even if you're not able to make it here, keep watching us online. It's pretty often that we live stream events, and if it's not happening at the time, we eventually put them on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch them again and again. Do we have any questions out in the audience? Thank you. Does the what? Yeah, you don't have to use a whole lot of pressure or even that much air to inflate the glass. Yeah, they're not blowing hard at all. Yeah, it's easier than blowing up a balloon. And one thing about the glass is glass, it doesn't have this kind of elastic quality like a rubber balloon. It's not trying to push that pressure back out through the iron. So it inflates to whatever volume you blow into it. Yeah, glass blowing, the easiest part of the process is that it's actually inflating the glass. Things that aren't so apparent, the harder things happen to be things like turning the iron and turning consistently. Yeah, what's your question? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, if the glass is 2,000 degrees, you touch it with a wet newspaper, how come you don't, crack the glass or anything like that? So actually, a funny thing you mentioned, the skillet. There's a principle called the Leaden frost effect, and this happens when, let's say you have a hot skillet and you drop a little bit of water, and what's happening is that little bead of water, it's dancing around on the skillet. It's so hot that it instantly vaporizes on the surface, and that little bead of water is kind of rolling around on a barrier of steam. Same thing with the glass. So as long as the glass is hot enough, when we touch it with a wet tool, there's this pocket of steam. It's like a barrier of protection that the glass is riding on top of. Yeah, so if we touch the glass, though, once the glass is down to almost solid, maybe right around 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when we have to worry about it breaking the glass. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, the steel is cold. All of the tools act as heat sinks, Now, it really is just temperature related. If the glass is very hot, we don't have to worry about it dropping in temperature, let's say from 2,000 degrees down to right around 1,200 degrees. We don't have to worry about that cracking the glass. It's just once we get down in temperature, we always tell people right around 900 degrees Fahrenheit is when the glass starts to break apart. Yep. Yeah, other than turning the iron being a very hard part of the process, I think learning to gauge the temperature of the material, that's something that you just can't pick up too quickly. It takes a couple of years of just working with the glass and getting the glass way too hot and dripping it on the floor, getting the glass way too cold and breaking it to really get a good kind of feel for the material. So what bird will this be? Okay, great. Okay, Kikari, right? Kikari. Learning new things every day. Great, all right. Is this a Finnish word? It's, okay, thank you. Even if you're lying to me, thank you for telling me that I'm saying it right. So here's another one of those things when temperature is just so important. We have this hollow bubble that Helena is going to collect over top of. And if we try to collect more glass on this bubble too quickly, it's going to heat that hollow bubble up. And once the glass is hot, it really doesn't do much in the way of supporting that hot gather of glass for us. So we have a good chance that that bubble, if it's too hot when we gather over it, it could collapse. So waiting for just the right moment, that's very important. So Helena has got over 10 years of glass working experience. And before working in the Iittala factory, she went to design school. So she brings another aspect of this process and the fact that, she's a designer as well. Everybody has different kind of reasons why they get into glass, different backgrounds of how they got into glass. So design is, Helena's kind of into the material. I think she told me that during school she was able to get a internship working at Iittala, and from there she kind of just got into the factory, into the process. So right now they're just adding a little bit of color to the glass. Earlier I think maybe I mentioned, but if not, color is made by adding heavy metal oxides in the melting process. And we have a lot of different colors set up all over the place. The color is pre-melted for us. We buy most of our color from a company called Reichenbach. They're based in Germany. Eventually they produce 250 different colors for us to choose from. We just roll through the surface roll the surface of the glass through the color, and it sticks right onto the surface. The base glass is clear, yeah. So we only melt clear glass in our furnace. It really gives us more options throughout the day to change just the surface color of the glass. We could melt, let's say, beautiful cobalt blue glass. Everybody loves cobalt blue. But if we melted cobalt blue glass, it means we'd only make cobalt blue glass for probably 3 weeks with a 1,000-pound tank. So Juha comes to us with a different background. Oh, before I talk about that, watch here. They're adding a decorative thread of glass around this bubble. Juha brought over a hot gather of glass. Helena touched it right onto the glass that's on the iron. And she's doing this really, really hard technique of tracking that thread of glass around the bubble. So it almost kind of corkscrews down the bubble in a very, very even fashion. That's not easy to do. And this really is just a decoration that we're adding onto the surface. Yeah, Juha comes to us. He's a third-generation glass artist. So his grandfather worked with glass. He said his mother worked in the Iittala factory, and now he's making glass. And that's a very common way to see glass, at least traditionally, being passed down through the generations. It's very common in the United States today to see people get introduced to glass in a college setting. In fact, that's the most common way now. So most people, they get a degree in glassmaking, an art degree. And maybe they work in many different mediums, but they focus on glass. So most of the people that work here at the museum have a degree from an institute, either a 4-year. We have a few glass workers that work with us with their masters in glass. But I would say definitely the apprenticeship way is definitely the more traditional way to learn with this material. So you've seen that we have to turn the iron constantly throughout the process. Anytime we stop turning the glass, it immediately wants to drip right towards the ground. That seems to be one of the hardest things when you're first learning how to work with glass. Keeping all of the glass turning and on center. But once you get the hang of it, you start to find ways to use that concept to your advantage. As Helena was walking back to the bench, she held the iron towards the ground to let that bubble begin to stretch away from the iron. And she did that because she knew the setup for the bubble, the shape that she was looking for, needed to be a longer shape. Now, I always tell people when you first start, gravity is your worst enemy, but you find ways to use it to your advantage the longer you've been doing this. Helena's using a torch right now. She's just building a little heat up into the back side of the piece before going into this mold that we're about to use. All right, so we just got a question from one of our online viewers, and that question is, how does an apprenticeship work for glass blowing? Well, typically when you do an apprenticeship, at least in a factory scene or setting, and this is from my own personal experience, it could be different in other factories, but you typically start off as we call it a gatherer. This is kind of the lowest rank. And the gatherer is somebody that might start by bringing bits of glass to add on, little additional bits. And maybe you'll collect the first gather of glass and start an air bubble in that gather of glass, and then pass it off to somebody with more experience that can do the harder steps in the process. The next kind of stage of the apprenticeship where I worked was the server stage. And as a server, you might do things like, let's say we're making a bowl with a foot on it. You might inflate the glass into that shape and add the foot on it, and then you'll pass it off to somebody who has more experience. And this person we call the gaffer. The gaffer is typically the one with the most experience throughout, or that's working on the piece. So the gaffer is in charge of quality control. They're also in charge of teaching that person or all of the people on their team how to make the pieces that they have to. So it's really just done, by making stuff over and over again. It's all about repetition. If you really want to learn to blow glass and you're working in a factory setting, you might try to go above and beyond. And every time you make a piece, you might try to take an extra step further into finalizing that piece. So I remember when I first started, I would ask if maybe I could start the bubble and then inflate the shape for the bowl. And once I could consistently do that, maybe they'd let me add the foot on or add decorative bits on. It really takes a long time to become a gaffer, though. They say, I think that there's a rule about 10,000 hours of working with any material to master the material. And that equals about 6 years. But after 6 years of blowing glass full time, I don't really think it makes you a master. I just think it makes you a pretty good beginner. In fact, you could probably have a handful of pieces that you can make very consistently. Some of the masters that we look up to in our field have been blowing glass for 70 to 80 years. And those people are people that have enough knowledge of the material that they can have an idea, and chances are the first time they try something, it's going to look pretty nice. After even 15 years of blowing glass, I might have an idea and I try it and it doesn't really turn out exactly how I want it. But because I've been blowing glass for enough time, I just have knowledge of the material that I can problem solve, and maybe by trying it 2 or 3 times, I start to become pretty happy with the results. All right, so getting back to what's happening off the end of the iron, Helena has gone into a mold. She's created that shape for the body of the bird, the kikari. After we come out of the mold, the glass is round, and to make any mold-blown piece that is we call it a turn mold, where you're actually turning the whole time inside the mold. This produces the smoothest surface on the glass, because if you're not turning, you're going to create seam lines in the glass. So after coming out of the mold, she was able to use a tool just to kind of flatten the sides of the bird. So we're going to begin to kind of add some additional components onto this piece. We'll do the head. We've got a few tail bits that we'll be adding on, and also a beak. I always tell people, though, once you start adding components of glass together, it is very important to isolate movement in the material. We don't want the body of this bird moving too much, just because it makes it that much harder to get everything else that we're going to add on to it in just the right area. So it's good to just focus on shaping one part of the glass at a time. Really beautiful color that we're using here today. The true color, though, you won't see it until tomorrow morning. So we'll have to let this glass cool down before we see that true color. We're going to add the head first, and Helena has preheated an area that we're adding the head because we are going to kind of add a hot bit of glass onto the surface of the material. And because we've already preheated the side of the bubble, as she blows through the iron, that bubble is going to protrude into the hot little bit of glass she just added here. So let's see if we can get that started. It's very important when doing a technique like this that you don't just blow very hard all at once. She's kind of blowing, checking the pressure, because once that bubble starts to protrude into the mass of material she added, sometimes it can get a little out of control. So it's always better to just inflate a little bit at a time and always check your progress. While that glass is very hot, Helena holds the iron towards the ground. And she's doing this intentionally. Because the glass is hot, it's dripping towards the ground, and it's kind of elongating the shape of that head that she's added on there. All right, so the first little tail bit, Juha brings over. Helena cuts it free. This torch is a really neat little tool that they brought with them to work here. And it's attached to a foot pedal, so it's an all hands-free operation. And it's in a perfect spot because they don't really have to move too far to use it. Yeah, we've had a few questions about, what's happening with all of the birds that we're making here. And these birds are going back to Iittala, so they're going to take them back with them to do whatever they please with them. But we do have birds here at the museum, just like this. They have a line of work that we carry. And if you're not here, but you're interested in looking at some, or perhaps purchasing some, we have a website. So they're online, and that is at shops.cmog.org. Look at that beautiful bird. Well, we've got one last little bit to add on here, and that is the beak. So UC's been over there adding some color, getting this beak ready to apply. All right, here we go, adding that beak on. We always bring over a lot more glass than we actually need for the beak. And that really allows Helena to choose how much glass she decides to take. So she touches down and then begins to pull the glass. Now she's pulling, she's kind of testing the resistance of the material, giving her some insight as to the temperature of the glass. but she keeps pulling and thinning the material until she's got just the right thickness for the beak. Okay, beautiful bird there. We still have to get this one off the end of the iron, and we're going to make sure that this one sits flat as well. All right. This tool here is a diamond file. It was dipped in water, and it's used to stress the material. Little tap, it breaks free. Now, there's a sharp edge where we just broke the glass. Helena uses a torch, though, to really heat that material up. And this, first of all, it's going to make the glass soft and molten. It softens that sharp edge. We have a plate over here that we can set the glass on. And this plate is just going to ensure that the bird sits completely flat. All right, beautiful job. Into the box. Let's give it up for Helena, Juha, and Jussi. Beautiful job. Well, in true factory fashion, we're not going to stop there. We're going to continue on making some more birds. So give us just a second while we get everything set up for the next project that we have. The question from online is, what is the COE of this glass that we're working with? COE stands for coefficient of expansion. And our glass is right around 96. This number, it refers to the rate at which the glass expands and contracts. So the larger the number, the more the glass expands and contracts as it's heated and cooled. And then the smaller the number, the less. So glass that expands and contracts less is less susceptible to thermal shock. Types of glass like borosilicate or Pyrex have a COE probably around 23 or so. And that makes them less susceptible to breaking from holding a flame up to it. That's why you can use borosilicate or Pyrex glass in applications like labware or kitchenware. All right, so I'm going to hand off the mic. Tom Ryder is going to give you his take on glass for a little while. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll get started in just a second here.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody here in the Corning Museum of Glass and everybody online. We are cruising right along, making these beautiful birds with our friends from Iittala. We've got drawings, we've got photos, we've got all kinds of good information for us to be inspired by here. So we'll see what they have in mind. They've got some fast birds that they're able to make really, really quickly. Some of the birds this morning were taking just 4 minutes each. Then they have some bigger and fancier, more complicated pieces as well. And that's what we just finished up there. It was one of the largest ones that I've ever seen. So should be fun. We've got a few photos out here on the table. We kind of chatted back and forth a little bit, letting each other know what the next few steps in the process will be here. So we can get started with another nice piece of glass. So Juha's collected some clear glass out of our large melting furnace. That furnace sits at 2,120 degrees Fahrenheit. And we'll start our starter bubble, just a small bubble in that clear glass. A lot of these birds have the color application on the very surface of the piece so that they could kind of manipulate that color pattern a little bit in a couple different ways, either using molds or even just using the torch on the colorized glass on the surface of the piece. We can pull some of the metallic compounds that create those glass colors to the surface. We can get this almost iridized look to the piece. Some of the pieces almost look like some of the ancient pieces of glass in the Corning Museum of Glass's collection. So we're underway. We've got a small starter bubble. We'll get everything all set and ready for the next few steps in the process as we gather up a larger mass of glass. So we're able to plunge the head of the iron below the surface of the liquid glass, and turning nice and consistently in one direction, we'll end up with about 3 times the amount of glass that we started with. So right into that reheat, into the melting furnace. So again, we're working with some master glass workers from Finland here today. This is a fun experience for us. Here at the Corning Museum of Glass, we're able to attract all of these different artists from all around the world. We get to see all of these different styles of working with this material. So for us, it's really exciting. We get to see this new approach to the material. The Iittala factory has been around since 1881. Generations of glassmakers making glass there in Finland. So we're excited to see all of these processes. They have unique tools. They have tools that they've made specifically just for their process. Handmade tools. The tools themselves are like small sculptures. So it's pretty interesting to see these unique tools, unique styles, very different way of making glass from what we're used to here in Corning, New York. So we're able to inflate the glass. It's fairly easy. It's as easy as blowing up a balloon. Almost anybody could do it. It's just a matter of keeping that glass on center and under control. Being able to stretch and elongate the glass and just keep that material exactly where you want it. These tools that Juha's using here actually have a graphite blade on them. Some glass workers might be tuning in online to watch this process as well. So we have these a lot of different graphite tools that they work with. These graphite paddles, the metal blades of the jacks. A lot of these tools just for one specific little part of the process. So we're happy to have Helena and Juha here in the hot shop at the Corning Museum of Glass. They were here last year. So it's a lot of fun for us to see them. They're fun to work with. Extremely driven artists working with the glass. They push straight through every day. They don't really take many breaks. Efficient glass makers. But it's not an easy task what they're up to here, coming to the Corning Museum of Glass and producing the work that they're used to making in their factory in Finland. It's a little bit like being a professional chef and cooking in someone else's kitchen. Some of the tools might be in different places. Some of the heat might be a little different in the furnaces, things like that. So it takes a little getting used to. You have to get comfortable, get settled. So we started with some fairly simple birds. They're most simple pieces this morning. So early this morning, we just made some nice, quick little birds. And here today, we're getting into much more complicated pieces. So it's a lot of fun to watch their progression throughout the day. We will be working over the next 2 days here. So they've got a 3-day residency here at the museum, making a large number of really beautiful sculptures. We met with them yesterday to kind of plan everything, to make sure we had all of the right equipment, all of the tools, all the right furnaces and annealers and everything all set and ready for the day. Our studio here at the Corning Museum of Glass is state-of-the-art. It's an absolutely beautiful studio, amazing to work in every single day. And what's one of the most amazing things about this studio is how adaptable it is, how we're able to work with a Venetian master glassworker one day, we can do our regular scheduled hot glass shows the next day, and work with glass blowers with a totally different style from Finland the day after that. So it's a lot of fun. We're able to move around a lot of pieces and parts of our studio and make it work. They brought a lot of their own equipment, a lot of their own tools. I mentioned that before, a lot of really unique tools for the glass blowing process. They have this big torch that they're working with here today. And that's something I've never really seen before, this style of torch and the way that they have it set up so that they can very quickly, most of what they're doing here with this torch right now is they're fire polishing the cut marks. When we cut through the glass, we end up with a kind of little rough or sharp area on the surface of the glass. Now, all of these birds are designed by one designer. His name's Oiva Toikka. And all of these pieces receive the O Toikka signature on the bottom. There you go. Got a photo up on the screens here. Now, he's designed hundreds of these birds, and he started with designing them 44 years ago. There's a lot of people that are collecting these beautiful pieces of glass worldwide. So we just made the Kikari three-tail. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now we're making a blue jay. I'm glad that I got the question of what bird are they making when they were making the simplest and easiest one to say. It's not a blue jay? Maybe it's a smaller kikari. Happy chicken. Is that a joke? Cool. We skipped ahead. Yeah, we've got a list of which birds we're making. And just for the live stream, we've kind of switched some things around. But we're going for the chicken. We've got the happy chicken to make here today. All right. So they are very efficient. They're moving through adding these beautiful little bits of glass. Again, using that hot torch to polish away any little sharp spots left from cutting through the glass. So we're kind of jumping around on the list here to fit into our live streaming demonstration here today. We got this beautiful happy chicken. So every piece of glass that we make has this small constriction line off the end of the blowpipe, kind of crimping that down, making sure that that is really the thinnest and weakest point on the glass. We'll be just about ready to break this piece free from the blowpipe. We'll end up scoring that constriction line a little bit. Here we go. So we break the piece free very quickly, flame polishing the bottom of our happy chicken. We want to make sure that we've got a nice flat spot for this piece to sit on, so we really heat the bottom section. We're going to push it flat, squeezing that nice and flat on the bottom section of the piece. You see we'll hold on to it so it doesn't fall off of the hot plate here. And we'll set this inside of our 910-degree oven. It'll slowly cool down overnight. There you have it, a beautiful piece, ladies and gentlemen. Give her a big round of applause. Nicely done, nicely done. The happy chicken in the annealing oven. All right, so that'll conclude our live streaming demonstration. Oh, is that right? No? We're not done yet, we're rolling. Oh, we got a question, okay.
Yeah.
Cool, sounds good.
So somebody asked me what type of torches we're using on stage. Obviously, I know the answer, but it's longer for my keyboard too.
Yeah.
Types of torches and what we use them for.
Cool. Okay, we've got a few. So we have a question from online. What are the types of torches that we're using? Yeah, just a little bit of information about those torches. So we've got our kind of bigger, fluffier burning torch. It's a propane burning torch. And sometimes we'll call that an exact torch. If you're working on a big piece of glass, you can use the bigger, fluffier torch to heat up one specific area of the piece. Now, when we go into the big reheating furnaces, you're heating the whole piece. You can't really specifically heat one area or the other. The big propane torch will heat up one section of a piece if you need to. Now we have these Oxy Propane Torches. We've got a couple of them on the stage in a few different spots, but the one that they're using is kind of unique to their process, this kind of big, crazy flamethrower-y looking one over here. But it mixes together oxygen and propane. And it can get up to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can reheat just one really small area of the piece. And you can actually, with this oxygen propane mixture torch, you can really liquefy the surface of a piece of glass. So we're able to really nicely heat one specific section for some really fine detail work. We're using it mostly to melt away the little sharp spots where you cut through the glass. Little points and stuff will very quickly round over when you heat them that much. All right. So we're moving right along into another bird. We should figure out which one this one is. Let's see, I'll ask these guys which one we've got going. All right, we're going to make another happy chicken. And they said this one's going to be a really happy chicken, extra happy. If I were to start collecting these birds, I would definitely start with the happy chicken, that's for sure. All right. So the happy chicken's got some powderized glass to start to create a really nice, even coating of color. And then it has some really big chunks of frit. So it has some really big mottled effect on the surface. Yeah, nice large size frit, like a size 3 frit. So a 3mm chunk of colorized glass applied to the surface. The different colors are made by a company in Germany, and they make them by adding in all different metal oxides and chlorides to the raw materials of the clear glass. Cobalt turns the glass blue, iron turns the glass green, and our ruby red glass color is typically made using some gold chloride. So it can be significantly more expensive. And they're actually working with a good amount of that gold ruby color right now for these additive bits of glass. We've got a pretty interesting technique going on as we add the head of the happy chicken. We add that little fresh, hot bit of glass onto the surface. With that fresh, hot bit of glass, heats the wall of the initial bubble of glass. Then we blow, and you can actually inflate that new added bit of glass on the surface. You end up with this nice little blown bubble off of the side of your initial piece. So the head of the chicken is hollow, like the body. So these are all blown glass pieces. They're all hollow pieces of glass. I think even the really, really small ones are also a little blown bubble of glass. So we're pretty excited. We've got 3 days in a row here working with our friends from Iittala. I'm excited to get into some of the owl shapes that they have planned. It looks like a lot of the owl shapes. Got a couple owls planned for tomorrow. Yeah, they're kind of mixed in. Some of those bigger owl shapes look really cool, really interesting. So you see they kind of preheat where they're going to add the little bits of glass. They hit that with a torch, and then they add that bit. So the connection, where the connection of these additive bits are, ends up being really, really hot. And that makes a really, really strong connection. So this is almost they're adding on the tail of the happy chicken right now. And you couldn't really break the tail free from the body of the piece without totally destroying the piece. So the strength of a glass-to-glass connection is dictated by the temperature of the connection. The hotter a connection is, the stronger it will be. So sometimes you'll see us make a temporary connection called a punty, and that connection's done a lot colder. But in this case, I haven't seen them do a punty yet. So we haven't transferred any of these pieces off of the blowpipe onto a solid steel rod yet. But it looks like some of the owls might have maybe they might have a punty connection on them. So very quick, very efficient. They're moving through these nice processes. They've been working together for years. So UC is putting on the safety gear over there, and that lets us know that they're almost finished with the process. Every piece of glass that we make on our stage here, and almost every piece of glass that you have ever interacted with, has gone through some sort of slow cooling process. The glass, as it cools down, it shrinks, and you want it to shrink nice and evenly. And if you let it sit on the table or on the floor here, it would break, and this piece would cool down too quickly, it would shrink unevenly, and it would break itself apart in a matter of minutes. So for this piece and all of the pieces that we make, they have to slowly cool down overnight. That takes about 12 hours for a piece of glass like this. But the amount of time it takes for a piece to slowly cool down is driven by the thickness of the glass, not the overall size. So a solid piece of glass, say the size of a grapefruit or a softball, you might want 24 hours or 36 hours to let it slowly cool down. But these blown pieces of glass, they're not very thick. The wall thickness is maybe 1/4 of an inch or so. So 12 hours is appropriate for slowly cooling these pieces. So we're just about finished with our happy chicken. Now, as we're all here watching this today, the color for these pieces is going to look unbelievably different tomorrow. The different metal oxides and chlorides in the colorized glass, they make the whole piece look so different today. So when this piece cools down to room temperature, it'll look drastically different. It'll look beautiful. The colors will be much brighter. There's 4 or 5 different colors on this one particular piece. We're going to set this piece inside of our 910-degree annealing oven. It'll slowly cool down. We'll get a closer look at this at room temperature tomorrow. Using that torch to heat the very bottom section of the piece. Getting that nice and flexible, pliable, we'll be able to squeeze and press this nice and flat on our hot plate. So we'll set this piece inside of our kiln, and we'll see it again tomorrow. A beautiful piece by our master glassworkers from Iittala, ladies and gentlemen.